Okay, what we're going to look at this lesson is development through aid. So, our success criteria, we can describe several different types of aid, analyse the advantages and disadvantages of providing aid, and discuss whether MEDCs, more economically developed countries, should have to give aid to LEDCs. Now, what do I mean by aid? Now, another word for aid is help. So, aid is basically help given by donor countries to recipient countries. Now, that means a donor is something who gives someone, a recipient is someone who takes something. Okay, so donors give, recipients receive or take, and it helps their development or it helps them recover from a natural disaster. Now, the way this usually works is your more economically developed countries, your wealthier countries, your richer countries give aid to your LEDCs, your less economically developed countries, your less wealthy, your poorer countries. Now, there's several types of aid. First is government bilateral aid. Second is international organisation, multilateral aid. And the last one is voluntary aid, which is probably the type you're most familiar with. There's also short-term emergency aid and long-term sustainable aid. We'll talk more about these in a minute. Aid can be given in lots of different ways. So if we think about the ways we can help people, it can be giving them money, but it also could be giving them materials like building materials or school books, or it could be sending people such as doctors to help. Now, long-term or short-term, what do these things mean? Long-term aid is it aims or tries to help the country develop in the future by introducing schemes to help things like healthcare, education, food production. So it's not thinking about helping LEDC today. Take education, for example. It's thinking maybe about the fact if you have a more educated population, if girls and boys have the same opportunities to go to school, if they can then go into further education like university, they could maybe become doctors or leaders who can help that country in the future. So it's going to help that the development of that country to have well educated people. If the majority of the population are uneducated, maybe unable to read and write, they're not going to be able to go into careers like doctors, and the country is going to suffer for the lack of that. So this, when we're talking about long-term aid, we're thinking not about today, but maybe about 5, 10, 20 years down the line, how can we help this country develop? Now, short-term aid is also called emergency aid. Charities and governments will send short-term aid after a natural disaster to help the country recover. It doesn't always have to be a natural disaster. It could also be a health crisis, so take coronavirus, or maybe a better example of something that only really affects the LEDCs, the Ebola crisis a few years ago, where emergency help was needed, money was needed, people, doctors were needed to try and stop the outbreak and to try and save people's lives. So it can be any sort of disaster or crisis that is going to help people today or this week, would be short term. Now, another way of dividing up aid is thinking about, is it large scale or small scale? Now, large scale aid is called top down aid because it's given to the people at the top, the government of the developing country, and then they will spend that on the projects they need. Now, one way of looking, why do we say so they're on top? And it doesn't mean, it means that people might benefit eventually, so ordinary people, but that decision is in the hands of the government as to what people are going to benefit from that money. Now, the problem with this is it can often be misused by unscrupulous governments. That means governments that aren't thinking about the welfare of their people. So it might be spent on, for example, the presidential palace instead of being spent on healthcare. Okay, so this is what we talk about as misuse. So not using it for the purpose it was intended, and that's a big problem with top-down aid because governments often give MEDCs often give top-down aid because often the government of a developing country is or a less developed country is in the best place to know where that money should be spent, maybe better than someone living in Europe who doesn't understand the way that country works, but it does mean that money can be stolen or used for something it shouldn't be used. Now, usually, like I say, but this is usually the way it's given by governments. Now, small scale aid projects are also called bottom up aid. So they target the people most in need of the help and help them directly without any government interference. Yeah, this charities tend to give this. So if we think about the governments on top, ordinary people on the bottom. So this could be something like sending textbooks to a school. It's not the money or the goods aren't being given to the government, they're being given to a school. Or sending vaccinations to be used by doctors. This tends to be bottom up aid. Okay, and we'd call that small scale aid. Now, bilateral aid and conditional aid, what are these? Bilateral aid is when aid is given, help is given from one country to another, and that can be money, goods, or services. The services could be things like doctors. Okay. Conditional aid is when a donor country gives a receptor country, a recipient country, aid to finance projects in that country. In return, the recipient country or receptor country has to agree to certain terms. So, for example, they agree to buy products in that country. Now, the Aswan Dam in Egypt is a really good example of this. Now, Russia, which is a more developed country in Egypt, gave the Egyptians money to help them build a dam. In exchange, Egypt allowed them unlimited access to air aid. Sometimes this isn't called conditional aid, sometimes it's called tied aid, because there's an English phrase with strings attached. It means we'll do something for you, but you have to do something for us. So we'll give you this money on the condition that you give us this thing that we want. And that can often be criticised as being unfair, as putting a lot of pressure on less developed countries who maybe feel they don't have a choice because they really need that aid. It could also be something like, we will provide you with doctors or healthcare centres, we'll build healthcare centres for you. But in exchange, your country is only going to buy products, it's our medical goods from our country. So if you're buying vaccinations, you're going to buy them from our country. And that means that it's not what we'd call a charitable gesture. It's not just about giving someone the help they need because they need it. It's about getting something for yourself as well out of that. So sometimes it's seen, countries give the sort of aid, we'll say it's a win-win situation. They get the help they need, but we get something for ourselves as well. But often this kind of aid can be quite damaging to less economically developed countries, because often the thing they have to give back can be exploiting them. It can be more than they are able to give or want to give. Multilateral aid. This type of aid involves developed countries giving money to central international organisations like the World Bank and the World Health Organization. WHO is one we see in the news at the moment. Now, so they will pay X amount of money to that, let's say it's the WHO. The WHO would then decide where and when the money is going to be spent. Now, with the WHO, we've seen that in the news recently, Donald Trump is saying he will not give the WHO this type of multilateral aid for them to spend as they want, because he, for whatever reason, no longer trusts them. Okay, rightly or most likely wrongly. Now, if you look at the World Bank, which is an organisation, a bank that's meant to help developing countries, when they take their money from developed countries, more MEDCs, and then they distribute it, they hand out to LADCs, but they're not giving it free of charge. It's not a present, it's a loan that needs to be paid back. Well, some other organisations will act more like charities. Now, in 1980, something called the Brandt Report suggests that each country should give 0.7 of its GNP towards multilateral aid. Now, we know that we tend to use GNI nowadays. That's because this report is now 40 years old. But even today, countries are not getting close to that target. When I was at school, we looked at this. We looked at what countries actually pay the 0.7%, and many countries do not pay that kind of money. Yes, this is a very small amount of sort of the money in the country is meant to go towards aid, so be given to things like the United Nations, UNICEF, the WHO, the World Bank. But the reality is most more MEDCs do not give as much money as they should be giving in order to further the development of other countries. Now, if you look at voluntary aids, this is what we'd call aid given by non-governmental organisations. So this can be things like Oxfam, Comic Relief, Save the Children, who will raise huge amounts of money for projects in developing countries. Now, this voluntary aid tends not to be conditional, it tends not to be tied aid, it doesn't have conditions attached, but in it can be both long-term aid and it can be short-term aid, depending on what it's for. They generally get this money from people's generosity, from people like you and me giving money to them. But they do also receive money from the governments. They tend to fund small scale community-based projects because they realise this means their money is going directly to the people who want it, and there's not a risk of it going to an unscrupulous government official who might steal that money for themselves or spend it in a way it shouldn't be spent. Now, like I say, so often it can be long term, but it's also short term. And these organisations are usually the quickest on the scene with short term aid after natural disasters such as famine or floods. Okay. Now, last thing I want to just have a mention of is as we're coming towards the end of our topic, we've talked a bit about development being a positive thing, helping countries develop for the future, but often it can have a negative effect on the natural environment, health, or traditional culture. So when we're thinking about trying to encourage LADCs to develop how they can develop, it can damage the ways that countries will often try to develop or are encouraged to develop can often put pressure on the natural environment. So one way, if you are LADC, a poorer country, and you need more money, one way to do that is to extract or collect raw materials. This would be things like oil, coal, metals, diamonds. But often, sort of collecting these or extracting them from the ground can cause environmental damage. So here's an example: timber is causing the deforestation of rainforests. Okay, the demand for minerals can mean large areas of land are being dug up. Factories, which are a way of fueling the economy because they're making things, they're selling things, they're making that country wealthier, can release waste into water or air, causing pollution. Going back to the one about the rainforest, if you look at Brazil, Brazil is an LADC. But one of the ways that they can become richer is by taking advantage of the fact they do have lots of wood, lots of timber. But in taking advantage of that and trying to make money, they're damaging the environment. Now, health, obesity, heart disease, other health problems. Now, we see that as a result of globalization. So we talked about the McDonald's index, talked about the fact you can get McDonald's pretty much anywhere. Now, there are positives to that. It can be good for a country's economy to get these countries in to employ people to sell things, but it can also have this downside. Culture, watching popular TV programs can affect the way people think and behave. Okay, so this is an example of globalization again, the fact that you can go pretty much anywhere in the world and still watch the same TV. Some products become status symbols, so Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and often people abandon their traditional dress in favour of jeans because that's what they see on TV. So seeing these adverts, so seeing people wearing these things, and they're abandoning their culture. So I just want to finish on that thought that development is a good thing. Trying to promote development through aid and other ways is a good thing, but there is a drawback, so countries have to be careful about how they encourage other countries to develop. And that's just a thought I want to leave you with at the end of today.